It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Matt Coughlin, founder and CEO of XSELL Technologies. Matt is a leader with a contagious passion for great customer engagement and the economic and business impacts created when customers are engaged in exactly the right way. Prior to founding XSELL, Matt had the opportunity to work with many quintessential brands, including Disney, Apple, Carnival, AT&T, GE, and Walgreens, helping them all to bring their customer experience to life. His experience in these environments led to his observation of a power law in sales. That law exists where, regardless of the brand, top-performing agents were not marginally better than their peers, they were multiples better and always delivered disproportionately successful results. Matt has a bachelor's degree in biology from Illinois State University and is married to his college sweetheart, Carrie. They have 3 kids, Emma, Charlie, and Henry, all of whom are top performers. Matt Coughlin, welcome into the corner office.
Well, Brant, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here. We had a great chat with you and a couple of your colleagues a few days ago, and very excited about bringing you in and hearing more about your journey at CEO and founding XSELL Technologies. But I always like to kind of start with the early days and maybe not the so early days, particularly with regards to the pandemic and all that's going on there. Gosh, I can't even remember how many months we've been into it now. I think it's almost coming up on a year since it was announced. We're in January, and I guess March was when things really got going. How are you doing? How's your family and how's your company been faring through this very interesting time?
Well, Brant, it's funny that you say that. I was talking with a colleague earlier today, and I said, it's almost like dog years for each survive the pandemic, and the amount of learning and just rethinking things. It's like 7 years or 7 months of normal business time. But we're doing well. I mean, I think, given the circumstances, one of the things that I think is exciting is that for an entrepreneurial business, we have already been thinking about how to do things differently. And the pandemic just represented an additional chapter of that.
Right. Well, that's terrific. And overall, business up, down, about even over the year?
No, actually, we had a really good year in 2020. We grew the business by closing in on 100%, and I think we're even better positioned in 2021. And to be honest with you, Brant, it's a bit of a function of the fact that much of the technology that we're bringing to the marketplace helps facilitate and support virtual workforces.
Fantastic.
Has been one of the things that has been a requirement in the pandemic. So business in general has actually been pretty good. But obviously we know that it's represented other challenges the pandemic has. But in general, I feel pretty bullish about where we're at.
Absolutely. Well, that's so good to hear. Well, let's start with you and tell me a little bit about the early days, where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
Yeah, certainly. Grew up on the south side of Chicago, and was the youngest of 7 kids.
Oh my goodness!
So I learned very early in life, Brant, how to take directions.
I love it.
Right, and I grew up in a great environment. My father was an entrepreneur himself, and I've had some really successful siblings who have provided great mentorship over the years. But, really fortunate to have all of my siblings, still within a relatively short stone's throw from where I live today. So
nice.
Very good.
Lots of nieces and nephews and any grandchildren coming along as well?
Well, I can tell you as it would be, just in the fact that you have 6 siblings, you're bound to have lots of nieces and nephews. I'm in a spot right now where I think, with 3 kids of my own, I have a 21-year-old who's actually back at college. I have an 18-year-old who just was, in his first semester at the University of Michigan and had to return home as a function of the pandemic. And then I have a sophomore in high school. And I said, as the family goes, I'm one of the people with less kids. So we have I have a sister who's got 6. So you could imagine there's lots of kids in the family.
Yeah. Oh, that's terrific. And you mentioned Dad was an entrepreneur. What kind of business did he run and found?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, if you go back and a lot of the young people probably don't remember this, but prior to some of the changes in pasteurization, you used to get your milk delivered directly to your home. And, we had a family business that was a milk distributorship here in Chicago. And, I'll give you a visual that I think will help bring it home for you. Imagine the milk truck driving up to your street and 7 very small delivery people running out and delivering the milk back up to the doorsteps of people.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So we had a really great, I think a great example because just even seeing my father build kind of a business that was doing well, but also see the disruption that occurred when things were innovated in that industry, it really gave you a sense of how important it is to be, kind of thinking about what's next and what could it look like in the future. So that business was one where, as I look back at it, those were very simple times.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And Mom had a full-time job with 7 kids.
Absolutely. I will tell you, in addition to the 7 kids, she also worked at a hospital.
You're kidding. Oh my goodness.
I think what was great growing up is that I learned teamwork pretty early, which was the notion that everybody had to be kind of kicking in and contributing in order to make everything work.
Yeah.
So yeah, full-time gig. I look back at it with 3 kids. I go, how did it work?
How did that work? Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. And school, was that important to you? Were you a good student growing up?
It was. I will tell you, I was not a standout student. However, I balanced school with some jobs and some different things that were helping kind of make options available for me. I think for me, the school that I went to, which was really influential, I went to a high school here on the south side of Chicago, St. Lawrence High School, where I learned pretty early the importance of leadership and integrity and some of the things where it might not be specifically part of a curriculum or outlined in a book, but certainly I found it to be pretty influential in my career. So I do think education's been very important to me. When I went to college, I went for biology and chemistry, which clearly, as we get through the course of today's conversation, you'll find out I'm doing nothing with that.
But you learn how to study. Those aren't easy subjects to grasp.
That's right. Well, yeah. I will tell you, I mean, coming out of that experience of going to school for biology and chemistry, what I did really grasp onto was the notion of kind of scientific theory and the ability to generate a hypothesis and be focused on how to run A/B tests and things like that, which, if I look back now in hindsight, I think those have been, very influential in my experiences. So I guess everything happens for a reason, right?
That's right. Any activities during secondary school, music, sports, et cetera? What other types of things were you involved with?
Absolutely. I wrestled and played football. And then, when I got into college, I had started to play rugby and really enjoyed that and had a great time playing that and met some really great friends that I've had throughout life. as part of that experience. But always have had some interest in some competitive athletics that have, kind of helped keep, drive down the stress and give you a way to get out and stay active. So certainly.
Well, we mentioned that you were CEO and founder of your current role, XSELL Technologies. We'll get into that in a few minutes. But what about earlier on? Did entrepreneurialism, come easy to you? Were there things that you did? The ubiquitous paper route, selling stuff at Christmas time. Tell us about growing up and being an entrepreneur, particularly with a father who also was an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. When I look back at it, I think, there was certainly always an itch. Very early. Interestingly enough, I not only had paper routes, but if I think back about some of the experiences, one that stands out is, when you're a kid playing Little League here in the Midwest, what is a normal ritual is you will be handed either candy or something that you have to go sell as a fundraising effort for a league. And I remember one story, Brent, where my neighbor, who is a lifelong friend, his father would take us to practice and pick us up as a carpool. And on the day that we got handed the candy, I just looked around and I thought, okay, I've done this one other time. And the experience when I did that is many of the people would say, I already bought it from another child. And so the day we got handed the candy, we literally, I talked to my friend and we literally turned to his father and said, we're going to walk home. And by the time we got home, we had sold all of the candy.
Awesome.
Simply because we had gotten to the people before anyone else.
Right. And in a new neighborhood as well, right?
That's exactly right.
I love it.
So,
that's great.
That was, I say it was a fundraising effort, but I will tell you it was probably my earliest endeavor into an entrepreneurial endeavor. And then, but as I mentioned to you, I went to school for biology and chemistry. And when I came out, I was really thinking about taking some time to prepare for the MCAT. And to be honest with you,
So your plans were to go to med school?
Yes, that's exactly right. I'd actually planned very specifically to be a podiatrist. And so, I took that summer off, and a family friend had actually had an opportunity that was open. And I really just thought that this would be kind of a summer gig, but I started to sell software at this other entrepreneurial business. And I think it just was one of those scenarios where the light bulb went off, and I just started to develop a passion for the notion of helping people improve their outcomes, helping people improve their ability to grow or improve their business. And so, I always say, even as I was thinking about a family friend of ours who was concerned about not knowing exactly what he wanted to do going into college, I said, the first thing that you have to do is just build the discipline and rigor about completing things, right? Through something. But make no mistake, it's been my experience that as you start to engage and get involved in things, your passions will emerge, right? You will find things that you become really excited about. And that was my experience.
Yeah. So you went into sales, right? Straight out of college. And was it with a software company? I think Keywell Solutions. Am I pronouncing that correctly? That's
right. Well, originally it was called EvCore, and Keywell acquired EvCore. So I was part of the EvCore team that got acquired by Keywell, which was a publicly traded company on the London Stock Exchange. But to be clear, we were a very scrappy entrepreneurial business that had really gone out. And this was the kind of the early days of supply chain and logistics where you would walk in and still find some pretty antiquated practices in play inside of a warehouse. And we were bringing, a combination of, kind of in motion automation where we could do inventory tracking and shipping and all of these things that.
So it was a software program.
That's right.
Yeah. On a hard disk, I imagine back then, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. I try to explain that to my kids.
We should probably explain that to some of our younger audiences. Software didn't always used to be online. In fact, online didn't exist until about the year 2000. Right. So it was a prepackaged, mostly B2B software program then, or was it?
It was almost exclusively B2B. So what we were doing is we were helping we were helping businesses that were, kind of in that pick, pack, and ship mode from a delivery perspective. We were helping them really automate and improve that entire process.
Oh, wow. And did you get into sales management there, or pretty much carry a bag during your time there? I know you left as a vice president, if I'm not mistaken.
I did, yeah. I mean, I will tell you, I mean, that was probably the first spot where I started to identify what later in life would become the reason why I started this business. But I started to really just dig in and understand the space very well. And so from a sales perspective, I was an outlier. I was generating, even as a 22-year-old kid, I was generating an awful lot of sales. And that led to, opportunities of increasing responsibility and being able to work with other people and take on emerging parts of the business. And so, to me, as I looked at it, that was the first time, Brant, where I really became very familiar with the notion that there is a significant difference between top performers and the rest of the workforce. So, that was something that I think I just kind of carried forward with me, and it helped inform the business that I'm in now.
Yeah. So how long were you working at that job before you first started managing people?
I was there probably, I want to say something like in between months 24 and 36.
Wow, pretty early on.
Years 2 and 3, having responsibility for working with people and helping them improve their outcomes and generate more success. Now, if you think back to where I'm talking about, that was an emerging space. Software. Yeah,
it was the mid 90s, right? I mean, this was very early on. Yeah.
So the one thing I didn't have to do was break through what might have been a more mature, kind of more, what I'll call settled environment.
Right.
This was an environment where the people that were able to grasp and understand the value proposition, the use cases, we're in a really great position.
Yeah. Were you manage people about your same age, younger, older, combination of both?
Yeah, a combination of both. I mean, there were instances where some of the people were twice my age, and wow. That represented an opportunity for me to grow in terms of understanding how to really gain influence with people as much as manage them, right? And I always think about so much of management is really just your ability to gain influence and get people aligned. And that was kind of the earliest opportunity for me to do that.
Did you have some good mentors and bosses during that period of time that, kind of helped you lead the way in terms of learning how to manage, particularly salespeople, which is, a unique experience, right? Not always the easiest job in the world.
Well, I did. Interestingly enough, many of my mentors early on were not necessarily in the business. I had an older sister who, if you just think of that, of the two bookends, I was the youngest, she was the oldest. And at the time, she was at what was then called Anderson Consulting. And,
oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really rising through the ranks. She subsequently went on to be one of the chief execs of one of the business units at Accenture and the chief strategy officer. But she and I would just, kind of routinely talk, as you might think, on Saturdays about, what are the things that I might think about or do differently, how I might approach things. And that was really influential.
How cool is that? What's the age gap between the two of you?
12 years.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So another generation almost. Huh?
That's right.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Terrific. And in those early days, you obviously advanced through the levels. What kind of made you decide to move on? You were there 7, almost 8 years, I guess, during that period of time, and went on to other sales jobs. Was it the opportunity? Was it wanting to expand your horizons? What kind of motivated you around your next step?
Yeah, I think for me at that point in time, it was just really around seeing the market dynamics changing and seeing opportunities in aligned verticals, but not necessarily the exact one I was in. And so I just saw that there were other emerging areas where my skill set, if you would, or my domain would be applicable, but that space would be one that I could be successful in.
Yeah. And you've pretty much been in software your entire career, right? Or did you take any, rabbit trails that might have led you away and led you back to where you are today?
No, I would tell you I spent the majority of my career in software, except for prior to XSELL, I worked with a private equity firm where I was the number two in one of the operating companies.
Okay.
And that business was more of what I would call a tech-enabled services business. So just imagine, a 28,000 person at-home workforce that would be taking, calls and contacts on behalf of large enterprises. And so I helped build that company and really take an awful lot of pride in that. But I had helped build that company to one that was really a pioneer in kind of that virtualization and virtual workforce. But it was obviously enabled by technology, but it was really truly a services business.
That was Arise, right? Arise Virtual Solutions.
That's right.
Yeah, cool. And from there, you actually went on to found XSELL. Tell us a little bit about that, how you kind of came to the, realization that, you had been working for folks for, about 15 years or so, almost a little bit shy of that, and then decided to go off on your own. What were some of the motivations behind your willingness to take the risk and obviously the success that you found from that?
Yeah, I'll say, if I think back about it, Brent, one of the really great pieces and sage pieces of advice that I'd gotten from my sister was to really think about each period of your career as a chapter in the book that you're writing, right? And what specifically do you want the chapter to be about? And I think most of the chapters prior to this were actually really in service of this chapter, right? In other words, they were a build up until this point. In hindsight, when I look back at it, I would tell you that, the business that I have here at XSELL is as much evolutionary as it is revolutionary. And the fact that some of the kernels, some of the key seminal observations came directly out of my experiences in previous business.
Right.
So I'll give you one example. If you think about this business, I had really been trying to scratch an itch, if you would. And the reason I say that is in my previous businesses, what I had witnessed was that regardless of the brand and regardless of the industry, I was building large sales teams. Think about, anything from 100 to 1,500 people that would be working on behalf of large successful brands that I had engaged with. In the course of doing that, I had basically witnessed that inside of those sales teams, there was a power law in performance. And what I mean by that is top performing salespeople were almost always a multiple better than their peer group. So, think about the top 5 or 10, 20% of your workforce generating 80% of the results.
Right.
And, when I was dealing with a 28,000 person team, you could imagine I became pretty maniacally focused on the notion of figuring out what those people were doing that allowed them to have such disproportionate contribution.
So the foundation really was, as you said, an evolution as well as a revolution. Tell us a little bit about XSELL, who you sell to, who is kind of the target folks, the target customer that you interact with, and, a little bit about how the company evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you just take that brief background that I gave you around, trying to understand what top performers are doing and amplify it, that was the evolutionary piece. I think the revolutionary piece in that context, Brent, was that, machine learning and artificial intelligence were really starting to emerge. And at the time, my sister was a trustee at the University of Chicago and still is. But there was Is
this the same sister that had been the mentor to you?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, yeah.
And so she was kind of heavily engaged, and I started to talk with my partner and co-founder Mark Storr. But Mark was one of these disproportionate contributors, but instead of sales, it was in the area of kind of technology and data science. And, Mark and I started to talk about this notion of building a machine learning platform for dialogue that could essentially learn what your very best people do and then make that available to everybody else so that they could produce better outcomes and better results. And so that kind of initial kernel or that evolutionary piece was just the understanding that there exists a challenge in business around how to replicate and deliver great experiences across a very large workforce. I think the revolutionary piece was the fact that the technology was emerging that would allow us to cure that scenario and really amplify business outcomes by learning what the best people are doing and making it available to everybody else.
So does your product or service go in and then analyze an existing company sales operation and come up with recommendations based on that? Or do you have an outside modeling AI or machine learning that's bringing that into an organization to influence change?
No, I think from our perspective, what we built is a SaaS platform that when I think about it, first and foremost, what it does is it listens to the enterprise. And really what it's learning what are the actions, the tactics, the strategies, even the tacit knowledge that top performers are using that allows them to be so successful. And I want to give you just one example, Brant, that will help bring it to life. But let's say as an example, I were trying to sell you 2 mobile phones. And that the important criteria on your decision to purchase was really wrapped around the camera on the mobile phones. You might ask me, hey, what's the difference between the camera on phone A versus phone B? And a factually accurate answer would be to say, hey, that one there is 24 megapixels, and this one here is 66 megapixels. And you might be no more confident or comfortable about that purchase with that information than you were prior to it. But what the very best salesperson might have said was the difference between that one is 24 megapixels and this one is 66 megapixels, which is the difference between seeing your daughter's silhouette on the soccer field or being able to see her face up close in a picture. And you can see just how that tacit knowledge is so influential in making that determination, right?
Right.
So I had a chance to kind of really be in an interesting spot where I was seeing all of that firsthand and knowing just how important and to be honest, how causal it was to the outcome.
Yeah.
Right. So the first thing the machine does is it listens to learn what those are, organizes that information so that we know where, when, and how each bit of information can be used. And then what my partner Mark and I patented is what we called the cobot. But just imagine the cobot being, and I'm sure, Brant, you've had at some point in your life a really great coach that was very influential. And at least most people that I talk to have always had one of those great coaches that have been influential in their life. That's what the cobot is doing in the context of work, which is
corrective behavior, right?
Yeah, it's sitting there and it's helping provide the guardrails and give them direction on how to perform really well real time. And so, I think, when I look at what's led to the success with the Fortune 50 and further on, I think it's that notion that at the core of our solution is a real business challenge. And we weren't just a hammer looking for a nail with AI. We really started with what is the business challenge that exists that almost any C-suite executive, when you sat down and talked to them about it, would say, you know what? I could tell you who my best salespeople were. And yes, I've spent many nights trying to think about how I could get everyone to act or behave or perform just like that person. And so for me, I think what was important was just starting with a really important business problem and then having the right tools to address that problem.
Yeah, awesome. How many employees today?
Yeah, we're approaching 150 employees.
Wow.
So the company's growing pretty quickly here. And
robust.
It's exciting because I feel like, my baby's no longer crawling; it's up, running, walking,
well
talking.
into infancy, if not beyond.
That's right. Full sentences. It's doing it all.
And are you selling exclusively to the Fortune 50? Do you sell to the middle market as well? Startups? Where does the technology best apply?
We are. I mean, it runs the whole gamut. So we are. We have two of the top, the two largest healthcare systems in the country. We have healthcare providers in the country. We have two of the largest telcos in the world. We have a variety of different clients. But I will tell you what I'm seeing is, especially in this context where, we're seeing this notion of the pandemic creating a disruption where companies can't have that, what I would call that normal physical interaction in the store or in the office with their customer.
Right.
And so they're trying to find ways to bridge that gap where they can still avail that level of expertise, that level of engagement and intimacy with the customer, but do it in different ways. And so the way that our technology is working today is retailers are using it to create a way to avail experts on their website. Large healthcare payers are using it as a way to help a person making a Medicare Advantage determination make sure that we resolve and answer any of their questions. And so it's really at that tip of the sword where there's this level of personalization and intimacy and understanding that consumer so that they feel confident and comfortable making the purchase, even though they might not be able to physically go into a store or physically go into an office. Yeah,
terrific. Well, let's shift a little bit to leadership. And, you obviously worked in a couple of great companies. You learned the trade. You learned how to manage people. And then, kind of starting all over again with a co-founder, it sounds like, Mark, and others that you brought in to grow that organization, over 125 folks now. How would you say your leadership style has evolved over time?
I would tell you it continues to evolve every day. To be honest. I feel like, I love the notion of learning, and I'll give you a great example. I added Sean Mobley to my executive team, and just by way of background, Sean was formerly the chief growth officer at United Healthcare, and I find myself on a daily basis going, "Wow, that's a really brilliant approach or a different way of doing things that I might not have thought of, but is really valuable." And so for me, I kind of view this, Brant, in the context of what I'm going to call lifelong learning. I enjoy the idea of picking up additional tips and tricks, and I almost feel that I never want to be at that stage in my career where I feel like I know the answers. That seems very uninspiring to me. It seems very close-ended, and it seems like somewhere I don't want to be. I love the notion of kind of approaching it like, what's the additional thing I can put in my, in my kit bag that's going to let me be even more successful in the future? And so when you describe, when you ask that question about my, my leadership style, I think certainly at the core of it is a desire to build a results-oriented culture where we're pretty passionate about the work that we do. But I feel like it's always changing on how we arrive at that outcome. And what I mean by that is we're finding new and different ways and certainly the pandemic has created the context where you have to find new and different ways to achieve those outcomes. So for me, that leadership style, it's years and years of development, but changing and improving every day, hopefully.
Well, it kind of started with getting outside that car and selling the candy in that neighborhood ahead of everyone else, didn't it?
When you say it that way, I think you're spot on, right? It is
very disruptive, Matt.
I go back to those overpriced candy bars where the whole thing started.
Yeah, awesome. Let's talk a little bit about company culture. As the CEO and founder, you are the company culture. You set the stage for that. Tell us a couple of things. Number one, what's kind of unique or different about XSELL Technologies from a company standpoint, and what do you do to kind of keep the culture fresh? And how do you kind of impact that with your organization as it grows?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think the first thing that I do is that I help each person who joins our organization understand that we are all right now trying to write the best chapter of our career. So just think about that, how powerful that notion is, Brant, when you take a step back. Imagine that every person is is kind of taking inventory of where they're at, and they're trying to write the best chapter of their career at the same time.
Right.
And I think that's a powerful one. But
yeah,
if I even go a little bit further on that, then what we really arrive at is the notion that, culture is not something that we somehow deliver to you as a member of the team. Culture is a living, breathing thing that you are an active participant in helping to create. And it's always been my experience that people support those things which they help to create. Right. So I think for me, the one thing about the culture is this notion of empowerment for people to be helping define that. And I'll give you just one example. We had a group of really talented young female executives on our team, or female team members, come and say, hey, we want to organize around a couple of priorities for the team, and we want to have these types of meetings. And to me, just the initiative and the feeling of empowerment to go do those things are critically important for the business. And I'm in almost every instance very supportive of that, because that's just one example of helping to create it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, you're growing in size and obviously growing in people. Well, Matt, what do you personally look for when you're making bets on the people you invest in and hire?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a few things, that I think are critically important. The first is that you find people that have a desire, and I say that because it's important that you have to have that person at that point in their career where they are trying to, they're at that point where they have the aptitude, the acumen, but the desire to go out and write the best chapter of their career.
Yeah.
And so this, we talk about this all the time, Brant. And I know it may seem corny to someone outside of the company, or it may seem cliche, but when I think about that, I'm looking for people who have great, skill set, domain experience, but most importantly, they have this burning sense of urgency to be doing the best work of their career right now.
Yeah. And a passion, isn't it?
Yeah, that passion. And, you say, okay, well, how do you understand that? I think for me, it's really about having frank and honest conversations with people as part of that hiring process, where you really do drill down into, this notion of Brant, I'm a bit of a realist. I mean, when I think about it, there are probably points in people's lives where there are competing efforts. You could be, as an example, taking care of a parent or something. And I understand that has to be a priority for you, and I'm aligned. I think it's important that people find the right fit for them, given where they're at in their life and what's going on with them, that they find that place where the fit is really strong. And so that's where for me, I always try and spend more time making sure up front that the fit is there, because I think that avoids an awful lot more work on the back end, trying to correct for issues with fit.
Are there specific questions that you use in the interview process where you can get at that, Matt?
Yeah, I think, the first thing is we always try and talk about very specific examples where they might have worked on a team where the objective was very difficult, and some examples of things that they did to achieve the outcome. But on the flip side of that same coin, we talk about where they might not have been successful. And in hindsight now, and I view this as part of our desire to be a learning organization, what did you learn as part of that process where the result might not have been what you wanted it to be? What did you take away from it? Then as I think about that, I start to translate those experiences. And I say, if you think about today, can you articulate what the most important aspects of your next role and in your next your next engagement are. So if you just ask someone to kind of say what's most important to them, and what I'm looking for in that one is answers that might not be entirely obvious. So the ability for, you'll have someone say, the ability when I work really hard to be identified and recognized, the ability for my contribution not to be stifled, or the ability for me to move through the organization based on merit and performance. And so you're looking for these, what I'll call somewhat veiled answers, but what they represent is the desire for that person to be writing their best chapter right now. It might need direction, but certainly you're looking for someone who's talking about what they can be accountable for, or what they can be, what they can go do, and will the organization support them in their ability to do that?
Yeah. And what demonstrates a sense of vision too, doesn't it? They've got a plan. They've got a course. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Matt, time has just flown by, but we do have a couple last questions I want to cover with you before I let you go. There's obviously a lot of speculation about what a post-pandemic world looks like. If we ever enter that, right? It feels like forever, as you said, dog years. But with a vaccine around the corner and probably ongoing vaccines we'll need to take as this thing, runs its course, what changes do you see ahead? What changes do you see ahead for your company and kind of the world in general? Do you think this is going to be a big social change where we'll just do a lot more distancing and a lot more stuff more remotely? Do you think that it's going to impact, business in such a way? What's your crystal ball say looking forward?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, Brent, the short answer is I don't know, but here's what I would tell you. My hope is that we get back to those human interactions that are to people, and that
I miss them, Matt. I think you do too, right? As a salesperson.
That's right. It's exactly right. Life is truly about relationships and those things that are probably on the. Now, what I will tell you is I think what we as if we take a step back and we look at this, I think one thing that we can be very proud of in industry is the resilience that we've created, right? And think about what is one attribute that I, in hindsight, now know is a requirement to be successful in entrepreneurship. It's resilience. It's persistence. It's that notion of knowing that you're going to achieve the goal, and then just putting your head down and making it happen. And I think what the pandemic made very clear is that we are a resilient group, and we are going to be persistent in our desire to overcome these obstacles that are presented to us. So, I look back and I think in the future people will say, "Wow, that was a time where industry demonstrated persistence and resilience."
Yeah, I think we'll probably also look back and say innovation. Right? Yeah. Look at the things that changed. We went through a real tough time for a year and a half or so there. But, the new products, the new services that have come out of it, hopefully will serve us better as we go back to a more social world.
That's right. I think that's a great point, Brent.
Matt, lastly, what career and life advice would you give someone who, maybe has their eyes in the corner office or like you, maybe is mid-career and has decided, I really want to do something on my own? What would you say to that person?
Brent, it's pretty simple. It comes down to four things for me: plan, do, learn, improve. I think so many people either don't do them in the right order, but set a plan for yourself, then execute it. Take a moment then to say, what was different than what I thought?
Yeah.
So learn, and this goes back to what I was talking about. Just take a moment and say, okay, what I originally had thought was X is now Y, and inform the next plan. And I think that flywheel, if you get that going in your life, just plan, do, learn, improve. It's been my experience that it can be pretty compelling what comes out of that cycle if you get it going pretty quick.
Excellent counsel. Matt Coughlin, CEO and founder of XSELL Technologies, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Brent, glad to be here. Thank you for having me. And again, stay safe and thanks again for having me.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.